Hey everybody, welcome back to Kat's Kitchen. I'm so glad you guys are back here with me for another episode. Today what we're going to be doing is canning some chicken stock. And what I'm doing here now is preparing our jars. And I'm just giving them a nice little scrub down here in the sink. You no longer have to sterilize your jars. If it makes you feel more comfortable, you can put them in your dishwasher, or if you don't have a dishwasher, just use some nice hot soapy water and you'll be good to go. So what I'm doing here, what I did actually the day before is I had made my chicken stock. I had five chicken carcasses in my freezer, and I had just kept them in there until I was ready to make a big batch of broth. And so today's the day. So what I did yesterday then is just put them all in a big stock pot with some filtered water. And then I had some veggie scraps that I put in there. I put in some celery, onions, and some carrots and just let it boil on the stove and simmer pretty much all day long yesterday. And then let it cool down, and I put it in the refrigerator for today. So, something like that, if you don't have a full day to can something, if you can maybe prep a good part of it the day before and then can the following day, that's always a nice option for people if they're really busy. So basically right now after we're preparing the jars here, we're going to get going with, I'm going to show you how we have to prepare the stock. And I do like, making any sort of product that has any fat in it, such as any meat product really is going to have fat the day before, because then the day of that you're going to can it, since it's cold, you can pull a lot of the fat off the top. And I'll show you that here in the next clip, what I mean exactly. And that will actually help to make your seal a lot better in the canning process. I'm just showing you there that those lids kind of stuck together. They came like that from the factory, so I always inspect everything to make sure that it's going to seal for us. Alrighty, so here I have my canner, and I am just getting it ready. I have our broth here, and you're going to see the layer of fat that rose up to the top. This is what I was talking about. Anytime you're making any sort of animal product, there is going to be a larger layer of fat coming up to the top. So by making it the day before and chilling it, it's a lot easier to get the fat off of the top here. So I'm going to take this skimmer and just skim that into the garbage can. You could probably do other things with this fat if you prefer to. I don't really have a need for it right now, so I'm just going to skim that into the garbage. And then our beautiful broth is underneath, ready for us to can. You can also do this with soups too. If you make soup and, the day before and then have to put it in the refrigerator, oftentimes there is a layer of fat that you have to skim off from the top, and that's perfectly normal. If you want to keep it in there and heat it up and mix it in, that's fine too. It's just specifically for when it comes to canning, you want to make sure that there's really not too much fat that's going to come up and inhibit your seal. Otherwise, you're kind of canning for nothing. And then you'll end up having to use that product, put it in your fridge and use it a lot more sooner. Alrighty, so now we're ready to start ladling our broth into our jars. You can either use quart or pints here, depends on what needs you need for your cooking. For what I need it for, pints are perfect because I've oftentimes opened a quart of broth, and unless I use it, if I use it for soup, I would use the whole quart, but if I'm not using it for soup, then say if I'm using it for rice or another dish, then I usually end up using more like a pint size. So just use whatever fits best for you and your family and your recipes. And also the other reason why I wanted to use pints is because I can double stack my canner. I have a 32 quart Presto canner, and I can double stack 10, regular size mouth pints on both levels. And just to let you guys know, if you're not aware, you have to have one of those grates at the very bottom of your canner. And then also, if you're going to do a second level, you have to have a grate in between the bottom and the top level as well. But those little grates are not hard to find at all. One of them came with my canner, and the second one I just bought off of Amazon just so that I could have a second level. So here I'm just filling up the jars here, and we are just going to keep moving right along here. I remember I did have one of these jars break in the canner as it was processing. I think it was maybe just an older jar. It was one of these hot sauce jars that you see the label on. The one I'm currently holding has a label on it. And I think it was maybe just, an older jar. It had, it was past its prime, and I think that's really the only reason why it broke. The only other reason why you may have jar breakage is if the temperature of your contents going into your jar itself, and the canner water is not all the same temperature. Now, it doesn't have to be an exact science, but it should be around the same temperature, because if you're putting something hot into cold, then it could easily break. Here I'm just going to use a distilled vinegar to clean off the rims of our jars. And this is just, I do this no matter what I can, just to kind of clean that rim really, really nice. That way we can get a real proper seal all the way around. But especially when you're working with a fat product such as this one, you definitely want to make sure, even go around it a couple times, because the labor is really in the prep here with doing this right. And then in the end, we're going to get a nice reward by having all of these seal. And that is kind of funny the way that one jar broke on me too, because the bottom of it, it's kind of like it broke in half. The top and the bottom were still intact, but it was kind of broken right in half. And the seal was actually sealed, so that was kind of interesting, but just a little something to share for you guys. Sometimes jars do break, sometimes things happen. It's not always perfect, but we did get a lot of product out of this, and even though that happened. So now I'm just placing and inspecting each lid down. And then we're going to place our ring. These are new lids. I don't reuse my lids. I know some people do, and that's fine if they want to do that. I usually use a new lid, and then I reuse my rings. The only time I don't reuse my rings is if they get rusty. Alrighty, so now I'm just starting to load up my canner here. And I forget how many I have at the very end. I'll show you guys. I think I ended up with about 16 pints, if I'm not mistaken, and that's minus the one. It was either 16 or 15 since I had the one break on me. But if you're just starting out with pressure canning, because that's what we're doing here, we are pressure canning today. Broth is something that's very easy to learn how to do, and I will link a good website for you guys below to reference for cook times on all of this, pressure canning times and whatnot. There's a bunch of recipes on there. It's the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, and it's FDA approved. It's a really, really good website. And what I actually did is I even took some recipes off of there, the ones that I commonly use. And you can either write them down or take a picture, have a backup file of it. Just in case something ever happens to that website, I'll always have that canning recipe, which is nice. I do have some canning cookbooks as well, but sometimes, everything isn't always in one canning cookbook. So I like to have the backup. So I do my broth, my bone broth for the beef broth similar way. If you want a little bit more clarity out of this, you can roast your bones first. That's what I do with my beef broth. That'll just help get any like impurities out of the broth. If you're not concerned with that, you can just boil them. For the chicken stock though, I usually just boil it, but for my beef broth, sometimes I will try to roast the bones first and then make the stock out of that. When you're dealing with a liquid such as this, you don't necessarily need, a ton of headspace. I believe the headspace is a 1/4 inch if I'm not mistaken, but like I said, just reference the recipe on the website that I'm going to share with you guys, just because there's not other solids in there, so you're able to take that up a little bit farther, kind of like when you're making jams or jellies. So these are our final jars here. We're just going to get these nice and cleaned up. I already have the first layer down in the canner, and I'll give you guys a look here in the next clip. And I'm going to show you how we can this. It's really quite easy. This was all the labor part, and the next part is really just making sure the lid is secure. And then there's the second layer for that grate I was telling you about. But once you have everything in the jars, really it's just about bringing the canner up to temperature, up to pressure, and then venting it properly, and then you put your little weight on, and then you start your timer once it gets up to the proper pressure, if you have a weighted gauge. So here you can see the 2 levels that we have in our canner. Now I'm going to show you how to inspect the lid. You want to make sure the gasket is clean and is sitting well. You also want to make sure that that little bleeder spout is free from any debris. You can either run water through it or blow some air through it to make sure that there's nothing in there. And you want to be able to see daylight through that little hole. Now I'm just securing down the lid, making sure it's tight, and we're ready to go. Alrighty, so this is all done now. So what we did is we turned the burner on high until the vent started to vent solid, and then we had to vent that for 15 minutes. And then we were able to put the weighted gauge on until it came up to my pressure, and then we started our timer for 20 minutes. I was just showing you there that the one jar that broke towards the bottom, but here is all of the stock that we got. I'm really happy about this chicken stock. Now you can season this any way you like prior to canning, and now this is ready to go for multiple different dishes. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye-bye, friends.